Sarah got ill last week. She was in A&E on Thursday, and she messaged me just before flying to ask me if I could do this. I got the slides last night, so this is almost the first time I've seen them as well, so please bear with me. Okay, so the overview is really from JEOL's perspective. What they were looking at is trying to cover their integration into the life sciences workflow for cryo electron microscopy. So we're going to cover the challenges for volume electron microscopy. That's both by FIB-SEM imaging and cryo electron tomography. I'm going to cover aspects of the JEOL cryo FIB platform and its applications, and I'm going to look at the lamella preparation techniques which they're supporting, cryo lift-out preparation, which has actually just been mentioned in the preceding talk, and approaches for volume EM, so larger volumes than you would get with cryo electron tomography. So one of the nice things about JEOL is they have the opportunity to use really nice pictures. We have Fiji here, which is incredibly beautiful. I have been to the top. But basically what they're trying to do is cover all aspects from sample preparation and the instrument design and development to provide a highly optically stable platform at high vacuum conditions with the intention of reducing ice contamination of the sample itself. It's a certainly a major challenge in cryo-EM. And they're looking towards providing flexible software control and integration into the instruments. What they're aiming for on the instruments themselves is minimal risk, low ice contamination rate, and management sample charging. And then moving up through the volumes, looking at large volume production between 100 to 1,000 micrometers, and then potentially all the way up to cryo electron tomography. So the first workflow which they cover for this is the cryo electron tomography workflow, which you've seen addressed in the previous presentation. Essentially what they're looking at is the entire workflow from freezing the sample, so the attempt is to vitrify it, either by high pressure freezing or plunge freezing, taking it through some form of correlation step to identify regions of interest, preparing the sample for the transmission electron microscope using the cryo FIB, and then cryo electron tomography. The idea across the board is to keep the sample preparation techniques as flexible as possible to give the end user or the life scientists, in my case, as much opportunity to innovate as we possibly can have. And you can start with either high pressure frozen samples, which allow you to vitrify much larger volumes, potentially up to tissue biopsies. You can utilize the waffle system, which has been championed by the guys in the New York Structural Biology, where essentially you high pressure freeze the cells already directly on the grid, or the plunge freezing of cells directly on grids themselves. And we work fairly routinely with suspension cell lines, but it's actually commonly used for cells which are already adherent onto the TEM grid themselves. After that, there's opportunities to go into different coating techniques. I use the ACE 900 from Leica. It gives me an awful lot of additional flexibility when I'm applying surface coating before going to the cryo-FIB, but essentially any approach for coating is accessible, from sputter coating to electron beam guns. A quick overview, cartoon schematic of the FIB itself. What you have is a SEM column, focused ion beam column, which does the milling, and the system itself is based upon a cryo vacuum transfer capability, which keeps the sample vitreous and clean throughout the entire workflow. A cryo stage, which is conductively cooled. The justification for this is that once it's cold, it is highly stable and fairly forgiving. If you lose a liquid nitrogen supply, you'll have something in the region of 2 to 2.5 hours before the stage progressively warms above the devitrification temperature, and that gives a fairly large margin for error if anything's going wrong on your system. A large anti-contaminator, and in this case, a large reservoir dewar, which is able to maintain the system at cryogenic temperatures for extended periods. In my lab, we're routinely running in excess of 9 to 10 days at cryogenic temperatures, so this would be considered fairly straightforward on this platform. As I mentioned, they're relying on cryogenic vacuum transfer using the Leica VCT shuttle. Essentially, the sample's retracted on a VCT block, which you can see here in the liquid nitrogen dewar, pulled back into the shuttle and then evacuated and then transferred to the cryo-FIB. Everything is based around about these blocks. These are the Leica VCT blocks. So long as you maintain your sample within the external maximum geometry of the block, you can do anything you wish within that space. So this just shows you two versions, the conventional cryo-arm cartridge, which is pre-tilted for lamella production, and also one here, which is designed for lift-out processes. To give you an idea of the workflow in practice, this is the JEOL clipping station where the sample is actually mounted onto the cryo-warm cartridge. The Leica loading system for the FIB-SEM, the cartridge has just been dropped onto the VCT block, is being clamped in place. And over here, you can see the process of actually attaching the sample onto the FIB-SEM and loading it. This is speeded up. Otherwise, I'd be here all day. It takes a couple of minutes to happen in reality, but the system itself is stable for at least 20 minutes during the transfer step. So it's a fairly relaxed CAM procedure, not any pressure for the end user. The sample itself is shielded throughout the entire process of being transferred to the FIB and recovered from the FIB if the samples are going onto the TEM. Okay, so should be jumping slide. Excellent. Okay, once you've got your sample into the FIB, it's then available for high throughput lamella production for electron tomography. Just a quick overview for anybody who's not familiar with the technique. Essentially, in the example we're going to show, the cell is growing on the grid. This would be a supporting quantifoil or carbon film. The FIB is brought in from a fixed angle, and essentially the material above and below the lamella area of interest is sputtered away using the FIB source. At the end of this process, you will have a lamella, somewhere in the region of 100 to 200 nanometers thick, which is then transferred to the TEM for electron tomography. But looking at the FIB itself, it's set up for multi-site preparation of lamella using a fast milling recipe. We can incorporate correlative techniques to identify sites of interest for cutting, and it takes about 21 minutes to produce a 10 micrometer wide lamella of approximately 300 nanometers thick, although that can be taken down as low as 200 nanometers if you wish, which allows overnight production of about 45 lamella. Just to show you the process, this is slightly speeded up. What we're doing is assigning the region of interest. There's a pattern applied. This covers coarse and then progressively finer milling to end up with a thin section, a thin lamella at the end of the process. They're just setting up the conditions here. I can see somebody clicking around on the buttons. On this area, this is your pattern recipe, which is going to be applied to this particular area of interest. Once the first one's set up, the operator will scoot around and find a few more cells of interest. I might try and speed this up a little bit. No, I can't do that. Okay, we'll have to watch it. Okay, 20 times quicker, a lot more fun. It doesn't really happen as fast as this in real time. Essentially what they do is they pop around, find areas of interest and apply a number of these recipes over the structures, the cells of interest to produce the lamella automatically. And this will now then run automatically overnight, leaving around about 45 lamella to come into the following morning. Okay, and this is the milling process itself, fairly conventional. The FIB sputters away sample above and below the region of interest. It progressively works through the beams using less and less beam energy to essentially polish down to a thin area of interest, and you'll be left with a clean, essentially perfect lamella in the middle for cryo-electron tomography. Okay, and just to show you the workflow with correlation, is this going to play? No, it's not. Yes, it is. Okay. So the FIB is here, Cryo TEM is here. Again, this instrument can be highly configured with a wide range of cameras and detectors. The sample is loaded onto the cryo-warm cartridge under cryogenic conditions. From here, it can be transferred to a cryo light microscopy stage. This is a Lincoln CMS3. It's transferred under liquid nitrogen onto the stage. There's a bridge here which will take the cryo-warm cartridge. Sample's just been moved onto the cryo-warm stage itself. It takes a couple of seconds. Carefully, without dropping it. There we go. And then from there, this stage is then mounted onto the light microscope, epifluorescent microscope, and essentially, so long as it's an upright configuration, any light microscope or epifluorescent microscope would be suitable for this process. And then the sample will be viewed and imaged and areas of interest identified for lamella production. Taking a little bit of a step forward, if you want to work with high pressure frozen samples, because they are far too thick for direct imaging or through the TEM, we have to use a lift-out process. So in this situation, there's a special cryo arm cartridge which takes both the lift-out grid, which is essentially like a comb structure, which makes it easier to mount the lift-out blocks onto, and an area for your bulk specimen position. So this should be a high-pressure frozen planchette. And essentially what you do is you will cut out a block of interest, pick it up with a manipulator under cryogenic conditions, mount it onto the FIB grid, and then further thin it using the ion beam inside the FIB. And just an example of this in practice, again, we're cutting out the block process, attaching the probe by redeposition method, and then transferring it over to the FIB TEM grid, and then further thinning it before going to the TEM for cryo-electron tomography. And this entire workflow is supported by JEOL software. They have a stage coordinate linking system, which links the optical microscope to the FIB, to the cryo arm, all based around about the cryo arm cartridge. So essentially you can transfer your coordinate patterns all the way through this workflow. There are a number of other compatibilities available if you don't wish to use the Linkum system. I tend to use this just using an overlay image approach in our facility. We haven't actually used that particularly much. But the entire workflow is essentially designed to allow the sample to be mounted immediately after freezing and then remain on the cryo-arm cartridge throughout the entire process. In addition to the more advanced high-resolution, fully automated cryo TEMs, JEOL also have a side entry cryogenic holder, which is compatible with the cryo-arm cartridge. So if you happen to have a side entry microscope and wish to do electron tomography or screening, you can go directly from this point into a more conventional cryo TEM without having to acquire one of these larger, more expensive and more dedicated instruments. So essentially their entire philosophy is based around philosophy and utilizing the specimen cartridge throughout the entire workflow. From my perspective, one of the big advantages here is if I have a bare grid or an unclipped grid situation, all of these various transfer steps have a risk of losing orientation or flipping the grid, which makes it extremely difficult to know where you are when you get to the end of the process for electron tomography. Utilizing the cartridge, the sample is locked essentially after vitrification, and at that point, every step is carried out with the sample's orientation locked, which makes this stage much, much easier to link to your original starting point. So this part's probably a bit closer to my heart. It's the area that I've been working on for the last couple of years, utilizing the cryo-FIB to generate serial sections and essentially build up large volume data sets in the same way as you would with serial sectioning in a room temperature sample. So essentially what we have is the cryo-FIB with an enhancement for cryo volume EM data acquisition. The sample is mounted and prepared in a horizontal position rather than pre-tilted. The FIB is used to cut away the top face. The SEM is then used to image the top surface, and then progressively the face is removed and you work through your sample with time. The challenge here is essentially that your area, your field of view progressively moves, in this case to the left with time, meaning that your field of view is slightly limited if you want to work at higher magnifications. So what JEOL have been working on is solutions to this particular problem. So what we have here is we're going to cut it 30 nanometers thick. You will set up the dosing conditions and prepare for a serial sectioning run. And what they've got is this external 3D serial sectioning software, which allows a region of interest to be tracked and correlated throughout the entire workflow. In this case, it's a little bit like conventional ultramicrotomy. You're positioning your start of your cutting face accurately at the beginning of your cell and preparing the area that's actually going to be milled over time. Just doing a slightly more accurate setup. The APS, this is for tracking your FIB position, has been set and locked. This is a low resolution image. We don't want to overdose our sample for routine viewing or setup conditions. And once the system is implemented, we're going to implement the cross correlation and 3D EM, 3D SS software. So essentially now this is going to control your final imaging sets. It's coming back up. Okay, so set the magnification you want your final image to be acquired at, any number of integrations, scan speed controls, which you might wish to implement. So this is going to be your final image, and this is only going to be acquired once for each slice to minimize the amount of damage going into the tissue itself. We have an update image condition here, which is just going to give an overview setup image, which is a low magnification, low resolution image. It's just updating now. Okay, so you can see here in the middle a red box. So this is our imaging area of interest. And that's actually the area that's actually going to be acquired at the higher magnification imaging conditions. And you can see it's not the entire cell of interest. They're just applying a cross correlation area. Again, this can be adjusted based upon where you think the strongest cross correlation is going to work on your image. And then at some point, somebody's going to activate a little box down here, and this red box will enlarge to cover the whole base of the cell, because they haven't implemented a montage feature to allow you to increase the field of view at higher magnifications. Yep, no, it hasn't appeared yet. Hopefully it appears next. Three, two, one, come on, press the button. Okay, they're setting up a number of image shifts. So up here, there's some additional controls. If you're not happy with the position of your cell, you can fine adjust it before you set up your final run. So the end user here wasn't entirely satisfied with where the cell was positioned, was concerned about the area which was not being imaged being dosed unnecessarily. Now they've applied the montaging capability, so there's a 1/3 overlap to make stitching easier, and then setting the system to acquire the volume. Let's skip on, okay. And then once it's acquired, there's a stitching algorithm that puts the three images back together again to give you one high magnification image with a wide field of view. To further enhance that, they've added an external scan control, which now allows imaging up to 16 by 16,000 pixels in a frame with free control of the scan aspect ratio. So you can actually set letterbox configurations if you wish, and arbitrary scan control, which allows implementation of that charge management strategies on the surface by playing with the scanning patterns, and also the implementation of compressive sensing and a number of other custom functions if you wish to upload them. The interface looks essentially like this. You can set your image size, dwell time is dynamically controlled, numbers of integrations, either by line or frame, a boost magnification option, and external TCP/IP triggering acquisition if you want to work with additional software during your acquisition. In the pattern mode, you can then control your scan pattern, either using the conventional raster scanning patterns or a file where you've defined a particular set of scanning conditions for acquisition in an attempt to manage charge. I'm graying these out. There's some proprietary stuff here from JEOL on these images. Just to give you an example of the data which is coming off the Cryo FIB. So this is a Euglena gracilis cell which has been cut through. This is at utilizing the montaging approach. Again, you can quite nice structure. This is plunge frozen without any heavy metal staining. So this is a vitreous sample just prepared. It was a living cell at the point of freezing. You can see the chloroplast, thylakoid membrane, nucleus in the middle, Golgi apparatus, etc., etc. If you look at it at slightly higher magnifications, we can see here the inner and outer membranes of the nucleus. And just to conclude, if you acquire, this is from a 700 slice run, 160 slices are being shown. Again, the chloroplast envelope, and this is going through the contractile vacuole and the eye spot and flagellar insertion sites on Euglena gracilis. And up here, you'll finish with a Golgi apparatus. And this was acquired using the UHD scan, so at a higher pixel resolution, but without the montaging feature. So with that, happy to conclude. I can try to take questions if anybody has any. Thanks.